combination of entities. I'm Rob Oates, past chairman of the II-ABCAL Emerging Leaders Committee. With us today is Tim Beery of the California Workers' Compensation Insurance Rating Bureau. The WCIRB has partnered with the II-ABCAL Emerging Leaders Network again this year to offer webinars at no cost to help agents and brokers increase their understanding of the work comp insurance system in California. Tim is the Outreach and Education Specialist from the WCIRB and will be conducting today's presentation. For today's webinar, we have muted your phones to eliminate background noises. You can still ask questions throughout the webinar in writing. All the questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Tim, take it away.
Well, good morning, everybody. We're so glad everyone is here and eager to talk about workers' comp today. Very exciting topic for us. My name is Tim Beery. As Rob mentioned, I'm the Outreach and Education Specialist with the WCIRB. I've been with the WCIRB for 14 years now, and actually much of my experience is working with ownership and helping others understand the impact of ownership on experience rating. So hopefully everyone will benefit from our time together today. So here's what we're going to cover in today's webinar. We're going to focus on the combination of entities for experience rating. And we won't be discussing changes in ownership today. That's a much bigger topic. But there are some great ownership resources available on WCIRB.com for you to learn more. And we'll talk a little bit about resources at the end of today's webinar. Today we're going to learn how to determine ownership for experience rating. And we'll learn how to determine when entities are combinable. We're going to go through 5 exercises together just to reinforce some of the concepts. And we're going to use the webinar polling function to let everybody kind of weigh in on those exercises. So hopefully it'll be a little fun and interactive today. We have a lot of good information to share, and just to let you know, we might go a little longer than the scheduled 30 minutes, but we hope, maybe 45, but we hope that everyone can stay with us for the duration today. So let's begin with why ownership is important. Business ownership, it plays a very important role in experience rating. When we say experience rating, that's XMODs, that's experience modifications. The ownership of the business is actually a primary factor in determining which data is used in the calculation of an XMOD. And all the rules that we're going to talk about today, they come from the experience rating plan, which is available on our website, WCIRB.com, so you can check that out if you want to reference the rules and the regs. All the rules concerning ownership, the purpose behind them, they've been crafted to ensure that the experience modification accurately reflects the history of the business owner. So a mod is for the business owner, reflecting all of their business's data. So it reflects all the payroll and loss history from all of the owner's businesses, which might just be a single entity in a lot of cases. It might be multiple commonly owned entities. You may see that on a rate sheet where you have multiple entities on there, and that's when there's common ownership going on. Or there may be a loss experience from acquired entities, and that's getting into changes in ownership. But these are the impacts that ownership has on the calculation of an experience modification. So hopefully you've seen one of these before. This is a rate sheet, formerly called an experience rating form, but this is all the data that's been used in the calculation of the experience modification. So in the top left, you're just seeing a portion of the rate sheet here, the top portion. The top left shows the employer's name and address. And you'll notice in this example, there are actually 2 corporations included on the rate sheet. Now, this is a fictitious rate sheet, and I can see that we weren't really creative with the names of the companies here, but we have Business Company, Inc. and Business Enterprise, Inc. So what does that mean? That means that this particular XMOD is using data that came from 2 entities, 2 businesses, and the mod that's been produced, which in this case is a 117, you can see that on the right side there, that mod actually applies to both of those businesses. So it's using all of the data, and the mod applies to both of the businesses. So that's really what we're talking about today. When we say combination of entities for experience rating, we're talking about putting the data for entities together in order to produce an XMOD for the owner. So what could go wrong? If someone doesn't get this right up front, what what are the results? I mean, how important is the topic that we're discussing today? Well, if the entities were incorrectly combined, let's say two entities that are not combinable are included on the same policy, then it has to be fixed. Corrections have to be made. Separate policies would need to be issued by the insurer. If they were incorrectly combined for several years, then we've got USR data, or the payroll and loss data reported on the unit statistical report. That would need to be segregated by entity. And if for those in the audience who are with insurers, you know that this can be a real challenge depending on the level of detail in the audit. So really, getting it right up front can save a lot of headaches later on down the road, because what ends up happening is while we're waiting for the separate policies and while we're waiting for segregated USR data, often there are a couple of mods that are on hold until everything is all sorted out. So it can be a real pain. So getting it right up front is a good thing. What if they are combinable, but kind of the flip side, what if they are combinable but they ended up in separate bureau numbers? They maybe one of them qualified for a mod, but the other one's too small, so it's ineligible. And maybe this has been going on for a while. That doesn't sound as severe, but it can have some consequences as well. So maybe the mod that is produced doesn't reflect all of the business owner's history. Maybe another entity is not rated and could potentially qualify for a good mod, and it's not going to get one because the owner's data is not all together. And let's say that once we realize it, once we discover it, once it's reported to us, we put the entities together, but then there's a limitation in terms of how far back we can revise mods. So maybe we finally combine the entities, but we really can only revise the current and the prior. And we'll talk a little more about that in the last part of the webinar today. But definitely some issues that arise when not enough effort is put into determining what the ownership is up front, whether or not they're combinable. So these are the reasons why it's important to get right up front. Now, here are some steps that can help you in determining whether or not entities are combinable and what to do. So if you know that a policyholder has more than one California entity or multiple California businesses, then you probably want to go through these steps. So that's So this is just kind of a guideline just to help you remember the different parts that you should take into account. And the first step here is to determine the entity type for each business. So what is an entity type exactly? What is an insured entity or legal entity? Here's the definition of an entity based on the experience rating plan definition. So we've got, the most common would be individual, partnership, corporation. Those are the ones you see most of the time, right? Now, we're not talking about DBAs or doing business as or trade names. Those are not legal entities. Those are business names. We're talking about the actual legal entity that has been filed. So these are the defined entities. And just to give you some tips, if you have difficulty determining the insured's legal entity type, and this is an important step, so it's important to get it right here, you may want to ask the insured for some source documentation. If it's unclear what exactly the legal entity is, try to get some documentation. That can help. If you're working with corporations, LLCs, LLPs, the California Secretary of State has a business search on their website, which is really helpful just for those particular entities, so not all entities. But that website is kepler.sos.ca.gov, and I'll share that later on as well. We can go over to that if you want to see it. But just some resources to help you try to figure out what the actual entity is. So the first step is determine the entity, so know the entity of your policy, or know the business entity. The second step is determining the ownership based on the experience rating plan. And this is a very important part. So in order to determine the ownership for experience rating, you have to go to the experience rating plan. Now the business owner, they may tell you what the ownership of the business is. They may have set it up. For example, we'll see in a second. Let's say they tell you that they have a partnership, but the partnership is set up 60-40 or 75-25 or 80-20 or however they set it up in the business world. It's important to know that the ownership for experience rating may differ from the ownership for other business purposes. So you really want to go to the experience rating plan when you're determining ownership for a combination of entities determination. So the experience rating plan defines how to determine the ownership for each entity type. So again, knowing the entity type is very important. So if you have an individual, or often called a sole proprietorship, then the individual is 100% owner. For a joint venture, the joint venturers or the members of the joint venture own equal shares. For a partnership, the general partners own equal shares. And this includes general partnerships, limited liability partnerships. It's important to note that for limited partnerships, the limited partners do not have any ownership interest for experience rating. So it's really just the general partners. For a limited liability company, or an LLC, the members of the LLC own equal shares. And this includes both managing and non-managing members. So all members get equal shares. There's no differentiation between managing or non-managing members. And it's important to note that, again, that the ownership for experience rating purposes may not coincide with how the ownership was set up in the business world. And this is often true for partnerships and LLCs. Those are two entity types that we see common mistakes with. So for example, going back to the example that I mentioned just a second ago, if the owner tells you that the partnership was set up 60-40 with two partners, for experience rating purposes, the ownership is shared equally by all partners. So for experience rating, the ownership would be 50-50, regardless of how it was set up in the business world. Okay, a couple of less common entities here. For a trust, the trustees own equal shares. There is an exception here if the grantor retains control of the trust and the grantor is the owner. For bankruptcies and receiverships, the trustees or receivers own equal shares. And then there's a situation where if it's a debtor in possession, then there's an exception there too. These are less common entity types, and just keep it in mind that when you are looking at the combination of these entities, that you do need to go back to the experience rating plan and make sure that you're following the directions there, the rules and the regulations. And then for all other entities, so this can include corporations, associations, nonprofit organizations, the ownership is determined first by voting stock. So if there's voting stock, then the ownership is based on the shares that each person owns. For the entities that don't have voting stock, when there's no stock, then you go to the members for the ownership. And then if there are no members, there's no voting stock, then you would go to the board of directors. So that's kind of the hierarchy there for determining what the ownership is for these other types of entities. Okay, so the first step was to determine the entity type for each business, right? And so you know the entity for each business that you're looking at. The second step is to go to the experience rating plan to determine the ownership interest or the ownership breakdown for each entity. And then the next step is to determine whether or not they are combinable. This is really what it's all about, right? So a couple of pre-steps to kind of work up to the real determination here to make sure you got all the information that you need. Okay, so when are two or more entities combined for experience rating purposes? And this is also true of when they can be combined on a policy. So, in order for entities to be included together, for more than one entity to be included together on a policy, the same rule applies as to when the entities are combined for experience rating. So I don't know, we'll get a little more into that in a second here, but the rule actually says that separate entities shall be combined for experience rating purposes when the same person or persons owns a majority interest in each of the entities. So the key here is majority interest, which means greater than 50%. Very important concept here, not 50%. That's a common mistake that we see. It has to be greater than 50%. So what does that mean? 50.1? Yes. 50.01? Yes. Greater than 50% is the key. The other part of the rule that I want to emphasize is that it does say that the same person or persons who own majority interest in each entity. So if there are multiple common owners that have a percent ownership in each entity, then you just add them up. And if it totals more than 50% for each entity, then the entities are combinable. And that's how you determine the combinability of entities. Now, once you determine whether or not entities should be combined or separated, then you make the decision of whether or not that you want to put them on the same policy. And we don't have jurisdiction over that. That's up to the policyholder. That's up to the insurer's practices, underwriting practices. But before you ever put more than one entity on a policy, make sure that they share majority common ownership. And then if they do, then you have the option. You can either put them together on the same policy, or you can issue separate policies. Either is fine, but they will be combined for experience rating. So if there are two policies, even if there are two different insurers, we're going to put them together in the same bureau number, and they'll receive one experience modification. Now, some people ask, or some people think that, well, these are very different entities, though. They're very different. They're not, they have separate policies. They have different FEINs. They're completely different classifications or industries. They're completely unrelated. And the most important factor is that they share majority common ownership. And just remember that experience rating is based on ownership. So if the entities share majority common ownership, they're going to be combined for experience rating. And all of that data, even if it's very diverse, it would all be combined to produce a single experience modification. Now, the combination of entities rule applies to almost every entity, just speaking to that last bullet there. But there is an exception for trusts, bankruptcies, and receiverships. And just keep this, we won't dig into that, that's more advanced. And so if you have one of those, feel free to give us a call, and we'll be glad to help you. But just keep it in the back of your head that if you do have an entity that's a trust or a bankruptcy or receivership, in general, these cannot be combined with any other entity except for very specific circumstances that are indicated in Section 4, Rule 2 of the Experience Rating Plan. So here's an example. We have three very different businesses that are all owned by Stanley, and he owns a majority interest in each one. So the work has already been done for us here. It's already been determined that Stan owns 75% of the shoe emporium, 90% of the shrimp spot, and 51% of the taxidermy. So he owns more than 50% of all three entities. Therefore, you have the option at this point to either put them together on the same policy, if that's the decision, or to issue separate policies and then notify the WCIRB that all of these need to be combined for experience rating. They all have to be combined because of the majority common ownership. And again, just that last point there is that regardless whether they're on a single policy or on separate policies, and even if they're with separate insurance companies, the data is still combined. In this example, we have two partnerships, and they actually have a common partner between them. Donna is a common partner in both of them. They're both flower shops, and they both have two partners. So we know now that it's equal shares, so 50-50, equal shares for each partner. But the problem here is that they only actually share 50% common ownership, not a majority. So these entities cannot be on the same policy. If they are, then it would have to be corrected. We'd have to get separate policies. If the data was commingled, we'd have to get segregated USR data. So these entities could not be on the same policy, and they would not be combined for experience rating. If they did qualify for experience rating, they'd each have their own separate experience modification because they don't share majority common ownership. All right, so the first step was determine the entity type for each entity. Then you're going to refer to the experience rating plan to determine the ownership. Then you determine whether or not they share majority common ownership. The last step is to notify the insurer, who will then notify the WCIRB whether or not the entities need to be combined or separated. And the insurer would use Form 601 actually to notify the WCIRB. And that form is available on our website under data reporting. So there is a tab that's just for reporting changes in ownership. Form 601 has a dual purpose. So you can report a change in ownership, or you can report the combination or combinability of entities. So this form it's several pages, but you really only need to fill out the last page if you're reporting for separation or combination of entities. But the form should be submitted by the insurer. And the reason for that is that the insurance company may need to update their policy records. They might need to issue any necessary endorsements as a result of this ownership information. So it really needs the agent or broker can help the policyholder fill this form out, but then it needs to go to the insurer, and then the insurer would then relay this and any other policy documents to the WCIRB. Now, if you're helping as the agent or broker, if you're helping the insured fill out Form 601, or if you're filling it out on their behalf, just make sure to review the information with the policyholder before you submit it, so that they can confirm the accuracy. We've seen several cases where it's submitted and there was confusion around what the ownership actually was, and so to avoid any kind of confusion or any kind of conflicting or contradictory information, just make sure to verify it with the insured before you submit it. Just to let you know, if the WCIRB receives ownership information that is unclear or contradictory to other information, we may ask for the source documentation just to validate. That might include the partnership agreement, the LLC operating agreement, the stock ledgers, just depending on the type of entities that we're looking at. Okay, so then once we review the information, process the data, and move the data where it needs to go, combine it into the same file if it needs to be combined, separate it into separate files if it needs to, if they're not combinable, then there may be some experience modifications that are subject to revision. And a common question is, well, which mods are going to be revised? Are you going to go all the way back if these entities were always combinable? And the answer is that there is a time limit rule for XMod revision. So when we do combine the entities, if there is a mod, then we would automatically, if the insured qualifies for an experience modification, then that mod would be revised. The current mod is always revised. Prior mods can be revised, like for example, the immediately prior mod could be revised if the insurer or the insured submits a written request to us within 1 year of the expiration date of the mod. And you can see the actual rule. This is just a summary here, but you can see the actual rule under Section 4, Rule 3 of the Experience Rating Plan. And just to give you an example, if we combined entities that were on 1/1 dates, let's keep it simple. So let's say they're on 1/1 dates. Then the 1/115 mod is the mod currently in effect. So that one would be the one that we revise automatically. The prior mod would be the 1/114, and if the insurer or the insured, the agent or broker wants the prior mod to also be revised, then they would have to submit a written request. That would be the insurer or the insured submitting the written request to the WCIRB prior to 1/116. So 1/116 would be 1 year from the expiration of the 1/114 mod. Hopefully that's not too confusing, but just that you're aware that there is a time limitation in terms of how far back we can revise mods as a result of combining or separating entities. And in that example, the 1/113 mod, that one would be off the table because it's already passed. The time limit rule. It's outside of the time limit rule. Okay, now we have some exercises, and this should be fun, hopefully. And I think we're doing okay on time. But thanks everyone for sticking with us. This is the interactive portion of the webinar. So we're gonna do 5 exercises together that will demonstrate those concepts that we just learned about combination of entities. And so in these following 5 scenarios, I'm going to show you 2 entities and ask you to determine whether or not they should be combined for experience rating. And we're going to use the webinar polling function. So you'll get a few seconds to kind of review the scenario on the slide, and then we're going to launch the poll and let you see the options, let you choose one, and then click submit. And then when everybody's answers come in, then we'll review and discuss the correct answer. So hopefully this is a good chance to exercise these concepts. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first exercise here. We have a partnership and we have an individual or a sole proprietorship. And the partnership has David Smith and Brian Jones. And David Smith is a partner, and he's also the sole proprietor for the shoe repair. Now here's the thing. The policyholder tells you that David Smith is the 60% partner and Brian Jones is the 40% partner. So take a moment, think about it. Should these entities be combined? And now we'll go ahead and launch the poll. Okay, so the results are in, and it looks like 55% said no, these entities are not combined. Very close to those who said yes, they should be combined, 40%. And the key on this one is, if you recall from determining the ownership, when you look at a partnership, remember that the partners have equal shares for experience rating. So a little bit tricky there. The insured tells you that it was 60% David, right? But when you go to the experience rating plan to determine what the ownership is for experience rating, then you determine that actually the ownership is 50-50, regardless of what the business world has established. Okay, so only 50% ownership for David in the partnership. So that means these entities only share 50% common ownership, which is not a majority. So you don't want to put these together on the same policy. Hopefully that was a good exercise for you. Let's try another one. Let's do another one together here. Okay, in this exercise, we have a limited partnership with 3 partners, 1 general partner and 2 limited partners. And we have a corporation as well, which is owned by Marcia Allen 100%. So take a look at this exercise. Go through your steps, if you remember the 4 steps that we discussed. And then we'll launch the poll in just a couple of seconds and let you weigh in on whether or not you think that these entities are combinable. Okay, let's go ahead and launch the poll here. All right, so the results are in. 57% said yes, they should be combined. 38% said no, they're not combinable. And the key here on this one, so we'll go ahead and close the poll results and give you the answer on the next slide here. So the key on this one is, who are the general partners in that limited partnership? So remember, a limited partnership can have general partners and limited partners. And so again, a little tricky here, but just it's important that you know which partners are general partners, which partners are limited partners, because it's the general partners who will receive the ownership interest, equal shares. Okay, so the limited partners do not have any ownership for experience rating purposes. So there's actually just 1 general partner, which is a little odd, but it is definitely something that happens for limited partnerships. For a general partnership or a limited liability partnership, you're going to have at least 2 or more partners. But for a limited partnership, it's kind of special because they may only have 1 general partner and multiple limited partners. So when you're determining the ownership, again, go to the experience rating plan, look at the definition. It'll tell you that it's the general partners who receive equal shares. So in this case, Marcia has 100% of the limited partnership, and she has 100% of the corporation. So in this case, these entities share 100% common ownership. So yes, you do have the option of putting them together on the same policy, and definitely you need to notify the insurer and the WCIRB that these need to be combined for experience rating, and we'll share a single experience modification. Great. Let's look at our third exercise here. So here we have 2 corporations, And the first one is a construction company, and Jeffrey owns 99%, Susan has 1%. The other one is a cookie store, and Jeffrey just has 1%, and Susan has 99% of the cookie store. So very different businesses, but again, we have to look and determine, are they combinable? So take a moment. And now we'll go ahead and launch the poll for you, and then select your answer and click Submit. Okay, so 56% said no, these entities are not combinable. 40% said yes, these entities should be combined. Very interesting results here. So, and these are not meant to be really simple exercises. They're meant to really challenge you in terms of the concepts that we discussed earlier. So let's go ahead and look at the answers. We can close the poll now, the poll results. And so the answer is that yes, these entities are combinable. And the concept that this exercise was testing for you is whether or not you remember that the rule says that the same person or persons can own a combination of owners can result in majority common ownership. So when there are owners who have ownership in each of the entities, you add up their shares. You add them up. So if Susan has 1% in the construction industry, in the construction business, Jeffrey has 1% in the cookie store, so they're both owners in each of the businesses. You add them up, and actually these entities share 100% common ownership. So again, this exercise was to emphasize that just remember that the rule allows for multiple individuals. So when there's more than one common owner, you add up their interest, you add up their shares. And again, this one's 100% common ownership, so yes, they can actually be on the same policy, and yes, they must be combined for experience rating and share the same experience modification. All right, our fourth exercise here is an LLC and a corporation. And you can see that for the LLC, we know we have all the members here, so it's important with an LLC, always make sure you have all the members first. And you can see that one of the members is actually a managing member, John Clark. And John Clark has another business. This is his corporation is Eat Well, Inc., and he's 100% owner of the corporation. So we have an LLC with 2 members, and we have a corporation with John being 100% owner. So take a look here and determine, are these entities combinable? Should we be putting them together in the same file for experience rating? And let's go ahead and launch the poll now. Okay, so 65% said no, these entities are not combinable. 28 said yes. And the key on this one, and LLCs are tricky. It's one of the entity types, along with partnerships, that people often get confused on. So if you're having trouble with the exercises today, it's okay. Don't worry about that. We can help you. You can always contact the WCIRB for assistance. We're here to help. And so for this particular example, though, the key is that all members have equal shares. So regardless of whether they're managing members or otherwise, they're going to have equal shares of ownership for experience rating. So when you know that there are 2 members, they have 50% ownership. Let's go ahead and go to the answer slide on this one. Take down the poll. There we go. So 50% for each member. So these entities actually only share 50% common ownership and are not combinable. So they can't be on the same policy. If you put them together on the same policy, it would need to be corrected. Okay, last exercise. I know it's early for these test questions, isn't it? Thanks for bearing with us. Hopefully everybody's getting a little something out of this. So this last one is just kind of a catch-all because it's a common misconception. So let's take a look at this one related to family relationship, actually. So we have 4 entities, and they're all, maybe they're all related. One is the farm, one is the harvesting, one is fruit packing, one is the truck farm. So maybe they're all related operations, and they happen to each be owned by family members, maybe immediate family members. So based on the family relationship, can these entities be included on the same policy? Take a moment to think about that. Try to reflect to the earlier part of the webinar if we talked at all about family relationship, and then we'll go ahead and let's go ahead and launch the poll now. Okay, great. 52% came in with the need more information option, which is always a good option. It's always good to make sure you have all the information that you need. And 22% actually said yes, they should be combined, and 26% said no, they're not combinable. It's very important to point out that we have no ownership information at this point, so it's impossible to make a determination. We only know that there are entities that are owned by family members, so we don't actually have any ownership breakdown. So we're not in a place where we can actually make a determination yet. Remember those 4 steps that I showed you earlier. So yes, we would need more information. So let's go ahead and take down the quick poll and show you the answer slide here. And so the key here, and the reason why I included this exercise, is because family relationship doesn't have an impact on combination of entities. It really doesn't matter. Family relationship does play an important role in a change in ownership, again, a separate topic, but has no impact on the combination of entities. So just because they're all relatives, don't just put them together on the same policy. We need a lot more information on this one, including the entity type. Some of them are clear, like the LLC, the Inc. are clear, but how about Samuel's farm and Samantha's truck farm? We don't know what the entity type is on those two, so we need to determine the entity type for each of the entities, and we need to break down the ownership for each entity, and then go to the experience, based on the experience rating plan, and then determine if any of these entities share majority common ownership. Okay, so just because they're relatives doesn't have an impact on whether or not they should be combined. So that's a common misconception. That's why I wanted to include that here today. So once you know that the policyholder has a related business or has another California operation, that's when you're going to go through the 4 steps for a combination of entities determination. So this is what we've discussed today. We covered some basic combination of entities scenarios, a little bit tricky, just to try to emphasize some of the key concepts and to debunk some of the common myths that are out there about combination of entities. If you do find yourself kind of struggling, you find maybe you have a really complex situation with trusts or with multiple possible combinations or entities owning entities and a whole lot of layers of ownership, we're here to help. So feel free to reach out to the WCIRB. We'll be glad to assist you. I will give you some more resources here that you can learn more about combination of entities and ownership's impact on experience rating. So there are a number of resources that are available to you if you want to learn more. A good place to start would be our website, WCIRB.com. For the agents and brokers who are joining us today, our website has a page that's specifically dedicated to you. Insurers as well. We have a box there just for insurers. and a box for employers. And the California regs are available here, so if you wanted to pull up the experience rating plan, you could come here and get that very easily under publications and filings. The Form 601, which is used primarily for reporting changes in ownership, but can be used for reporting separation or combination of entities, that's available on our website as well, and that's under the data reporting section if you see that tab on the upper left corner right above the picture. Here's what the agent or broker overview page looks like. And so if you go here, you can find out information about how to access experience modifications and inspection reports using WCIRB Connect. If you're not a registered user of Connect, you need to check that out. It's a free service, and you can actually get the rate sheet when you're the agent or broker of record. So definitely something valuable. We feel is a very valuable service. So if you don't know about it, you want to find out more, check that out. We do webinars as well for training on Connect. Come to this page if you want to find out about our upcoming webinars, and you can also sign up for e-newsletters like the CPA Insight, discussing various classification topics, the News and Notes, which is just went out today, which covers a variety of issues with workers' comp. So sign up for those. We think they're a valuable resource, and you can find the archive as well on our website if you want to look at back issues. In the Learning Center, you can watch our Education on Demand videos. We've got about a dozen or so videos throughout our website on different workers' comp topics. So if you wanted to dig in more on ownership, there's a 21-minute video on our website that you can check out specifically about ownership. It is a high-level overview, and it moves at a good pace, and you're not going to get the exercises and the interactions that we got today. But it is a good primer if you want to get more exposure to ownership. And we do have a couple more webinars in our series with IIAB Cal. We're so happy to partner and to be able to provide this kind of workers' comp education to you today. And we hope you'll join us for the next two webinars in our series. And if you want to register for those, just go to insurefest.org. And then lastly, we'll be at InsureFest 2015 in Huntington Beach. So if you're going to be there, look for us. We'll have a workshop about upcoming 2016 changes, and you'll also get a preview of the 2017 variable split plan, which is pretty exciting stuff for experience rating. So we hope to see you there. And I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Rob.
Thank you, Tim. Now I'd like to open it up, the webinar, for any questions you might have. If you haven't already done so, please submit your questions in writing in the toolbar on the right-hand or left-hand side of your screen. And I'm also now going to turn it back over to Tim so he can answer these questions.
Okay, so one question we have here, do we have to submit a completed 601 to request a decombine? And you know, a completed 601, I'm not sure what the extent of the question is. The 601 is a great place to start. You really only have to fill out probably the first and the last page if it's just for combining or separating entities. But keep in mind, I think the most common misconception when we're receiving 601 about, for example, decombining entities, we usually get it and it says, these entities were never combinable, please separate forever and ever. And really what happened was a change in ownership occurred that resulted in the entities not being combinable anymore. So you may need to dig a little deeper. You know, you may need to make sure that change in ownership didn't occur that affected the combinability. Again, we didn't talk about changes in ownership today, but just when you do use Form 601, just make sure that it truly is a case where either they were always combinable and should be put together, or they were never combinable and should be separated. So yes, that is a good form to use to report that to us. Another question here, what if the entity is a nonprofit? And hopefully we addressed that earlier on. So a nonprofit, if you're talking about a nonprofit corporation or a nonprofit association, it's really about what is the entity type. So nonprofit doesn't tell me enough. Is it a corporation? Is it an association? If so, you want to go to those specific rules in the experience rating plan. Remember that hierarchy from earlier on. If they have issued stock, then that's where you're going to determine the ownership. If there's no stock, then you go to the members. If there's no members, then you go to the board of directors. So that's how you determine the ownership for a nonprofit corporation or nonprofit association. Question about husband and wife entities. This one always puts a curveball. So if you remember from the slide that shows you the definition of an entity in the experience rating plan, it doesn't mention husband and wife. It doesn't acknowledge husband and wife as an approved entity. So we really don't have any guidelines in terms of how to determine ownership for husband and wife. So what we end up doing, what we have to do is, if the insurer decides to write a husband and wife policy, we would say, well, if you're telling us that both the husband and the wife are owners, then we have to count it as 50-50. And that can have a real impact on the combination of entities if the carrier chooses to write the policy that way. In the cases where it's a question, oftentimes when we've questioned it, often what we find out is that it's actually sole proprietorship, and really just one of them has the ownership. And so by going to tax documents and other source documentation like that, you may find out what the ownership really is. And so you just want to be careful with that. That's not an entity type that's recognized by the experience rating plan, so that one is definitely a curveball. Hopefully that helps you. That answer helps. How do we determine combinability for a limited partnership where the general partner is a corporation or an LLC? Wow, what a great question. So now you're talking about a situation where entities own other entities. So when you start getting in and breaking it down, you're finding multiple levels of ownership here. And you do want to break it down all the way to the individual level. So you may have to get, if you have a limited partnership where the general partner is an LLC, well, then you need to find out who are the members of the LLC. If the members of the LLC are other entities, you need to break those entities down. So it can get pretty complex at times, and that's why earlier I mentioned that if you do find yourself with one of those scenarios, you can contact us for help. We can assist you in breaking it down. And then what happens is the ownership is proportional. So another rule that's in the experience rating plan tells us that when businesses are owned by other entities, then the ownership is proportional based on the ownership breakdown. So it can get pretty complex, but we can definitely help you with that. Another question here: if an LLC has one manager and all the other owners are just investors, how would this be viewed? So for this one, LLCs, you need to know who the members are. You need to break down who are all the members, and you may have to go to the LLC operating agreement for that. So you may want to go to the source documentation to see who are actually listed as the members, managing members, otherwise. You need to know all members in order to determine the ownership. Here's a question, interesting. If two entities are combinable for experience rating, can one company be self-insured and the other be insured? If so, is the payroll and loss data considered in the experience rating for the insured company? Great question. When you're in, so a company can choose to be self-insured. There's a self-insurance program through the DIR, the self-insurance office. And if one, I've never seen a case like this, but if one entity was self-insured and the other was not, we wouldn't have any of the self-insurance data to combine for experience rating. So if the insured qualified for a mod, it would just be based on the insured entity. Now, if the other entity came out of self-insurance and wanted to try to utilize that data to combine for the experience modification, we do have a process. I believe it's Form 701. If you want us to review the data from the self-insurance period to be used, so there is a process for that. It goes through a specific process to get approval, and then if it is approved, then we could potentially use it for the combination. But that's only after both of them are out of self-insurance. So hopefully that helps. Please show an example of combinable entities where the owner owns several entities with the majority. I'm sorry, your question was cut off here. So there are some questions here that I'll try to address afterwards by email. And so if you didn't get your question answered here today, we can definitely address them one-on-one. So feel free to send us an email. You can go to our website under Contact Us, and we have the information there for our customer service department. We have an excellent customer service department, and they'll be glad to assist you with any specific scenarios that you actually have. I'm taking a look here just to see if there are any others that I can answer here. Here's a question: can general partnerships ever be combinable? And the answer is absolutely, yes. General partners can be combinable. So the partnerships that we looked at today, they only had 2 partners. So that does make it tricky. You know, oftentimes you're only going to have 2 partners. For 2 partners, you're only going to have 50% common ownership typically, either 50 or 100, right? And so it's either combinable or not combinable. But when you get into partnerships with multiple partners, you can definitely have cases where the partnerships are combinable. So yeah, don't think that the scenarios today, they're very specific to those details that were provided. It doesn't mean that a general partnership is never combinable with another entity. That's not the case. But just keep in mind that you do want to be careful, because general partnerships and LLCs are often where people make mistakes in combinability. So yes, partnerships can be combinable, but it just depends on the specific circumstances. If there are multiple, let's say there are 4 partners in each partnership, and let's say 3 of them are common, then yes, those 2 partnerships could be combined. All right, and so I think the rest of these we're going to handle by email. So thank you very much for your questions, and hopefully everyone got a little something out of today's webinar. I'll turn it back over to Rob now.
Hey, Tim, thank you very much for spending time with us today and providing us with your insight. And thank you to all the attendees as well. As Tim suggested, we will be answering all the questions via email. He's got a lot of great information. You can find it all at the WCIRB website. And if you'd like to hear more on this subject, we will be presenting the 2 additional work comp webinars, September 14th and October 14th as well, that Tim alluded to. To register for those webinars or to download a recorded version of today's webinar, please visit www.iiabcal.org and click on the Events tab. As Tim also talked about, the WCIRB experts will be a keynote speaker at InsureFest this year, talking about the 2016 workers' comp changes and preview of the 2017 variable split. InsureFest is November 4th through the 6th at the Waterfront Beach Resort in Huntington Beach. For more information and to register, please visit insurefest.org. That concludes today's webinar. Thank you all very much for participating.